If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come on. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuel.
Man, we at it again with this video thing. No big deal.
Yep. I'm still getting used to it, man. I'm still getting used to it. It's a little different.
Yeah, man. We're working out the kinks, but hopefully the audience sticks with us. I'm sure it'll be a bumpy road. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, but, hopefully they're not getting tired of seeing our pretty faces.
Yeah, pretty. I'm not sure about that one, but hopefully they find our interactions good enough.
All right. So what's the topic for today, Joel?
Good old. It's like we're coming full circle a little bit here. We're touching on the census again, a little more focused than the last time we did this. A little bit more narrowed in on some of the census data. But I think I don't know the episode off the top of my head, but I want to say one of our first 5 episodes was touching on StatsCan. But it might have been first 10.
Right.
I'll make sure to find it and put in the show notes page.
Yeah, definitely. I think of course looking at the stats, I always enjoy kind of episodes because it kind of gets to the pulse of where the country is at, and being able to look at the numbers and ask the questions that some of the guys who are crunching the numbers didn't ask. So and also see some hidden points in the stats. So I'm looking forward to this. So for the listeners, to let you know the direction we're heading in, we're going to look at what is well, first of all, we're talking about Canada as the number 1 in common law in the G7 in terms of relationships, common law. And so we're going to hit the points of what is the difference between common law and marriage and look at the pros and cons. And then we're going to look at as Canada has the highest share of common law couples among the G7 countries, and we're going to look at why that is. And then we're going to look at the gender diversity status or status of couples captured from the first time or for the in the stats. So we're going to look at that and then end with our 2 cents.
So what appealed this, or what made this issue appeal to you, or what aspect of this stat drew you in? Why did you find it peculiar?
Because I have some friends, some family that live common law. And we were having a discussion about that. Why are they common law? Or sometimes they don't even realize that they're common law, or even again, and that brings back again to is in comparison to or contrast to common law. What about marriage? Is marriage important? What's the point of marriage? Why are there tax incentives for it? So when this stat came up and they're like, oh, Canada is increasing, or we're number 1 in common law in the G7, I was like, okay, well, let's look at these numbers. Let's crunch these numbers and see what's going on. So first, let's look at the pros and cons of marriage. Oh, well, first, let's define common law and define marriage, and then we'll get into some pros and cons. So, based on the province that you live in, a common law can be different, right? So it can be after 6 months to a year. And then in regards to the terms, if you were to separate, uh, like for example, like BC, it's the exact same as being married. So the terms of separation that you get with being married, it would be the same as if you were in common law in BC. But in other places, the terms aren't so much the same. And technically, in general, it's a lot more difficult for a person that lives common law to separate in comparison to marriage, because when you're married, legally everything's taken care of from the time you say I do in the eyes of the government. So separation is a little bit more cleaner, versus when you're common law, there's nothing in writing. And so in order to make that separation peaceful, before you get into the common law, or while you're in the common law relationship, you have to start writing your terms. Right. So yeah, you'd have to start writing down your terms in regards to what happens if you were to separate. And then for marriage, okay, and marriage is an institution, a formal agreement in the eyes of the government, and if you're religious, in the eyes of God, to that your relationship is formal in the eyes of God, in the Christian sense, the Christian God. And if you're not a Christian, marriage, you can still have marriage apart from God.
Yeah, that's good. I will. I think that's a really good point. That common law results in a little more unintentionality to both the union and the, let's say, dissolution of such union, if that be the case. I'll say I had a friend who found a very I won't name names, but I found a very
don't do that.
Convenient way to avoid being put into common law. And it's very simple. Rental agreement.
Okay, what do you mean?
So I'm renting a room from you. So now our living arrangement is one of a tenant and landlord, or sublease if you're the both, if the other person's not a landlord. Now, obviously, that can only go so far. Both parties were intentional in creating such a scenario, and it turns out that these two people did also end up getting married. But the idea is that they essentially used a rental agreement as a means to demonstrate that they weren't common law. And so it was a way to prevent. Now, that would only work so well if both parties have that intention and both parties continue to uphold it. Because if one of the two parties wanted to sort of, go a different route, that approach could be argued against.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what I was going to say, Joel.
Yes.
No, that's what I was going to say in regards to, like, I read some cases where, yes, people tried to just say, okay, well, this person is renting from me, but after 15 years and 3 kids, and then you take it to court, that's not going to hold up to say that this person was just a renter.
No, and I mean, use Ontario. I believe the terms are 6 months until you're common law. And so for a couple that viewed, being in a relationship that, hey, if this goes a year and we want to just part ways, hey, one party owns the property that they live in, the other one is a tenant. Here's the rental agreement, and it makes the dissolution avoid what the government wants, which is, or I shouldn't say wants, what the government deems based on this rule. But to your point, 15 years, kids, all these things, that contract of renting would only go so far. And like I said, it would be more so to prevent the government from saying, hey, you guys are common law. Be like, no, I just live with this person. As opposed to, hey, you guys have the same address on your tax returns. But
Yeah, totally. And so that's something to keep an eye out on when looking at those things. Yeah, because it can get real messy when separating as common law, right? Well, okay, let's look at some pros and
yeah,
cons. Let's look at some pros and cons of marriage and common law. So for let's start with common law. So for common law, the con would be separation is more complicated. Spousal support and property rights. Thus, lawyer fees can cost like between 50,000 to 70,000 per person, and trying to sort out what belongs to who. And then you have both people coming in with 50-50, but both parties at the end of a separation might not leave with 50-50 because of spousal support, maybe child support, or whatever the case may be. And then there's a general misconception about the legal responsibilities of a common law relationship. The positives of a common law relationship is that you can afford your rent. It's easier access to sex, and it's an informal commitment. And then for marriage, the cost of a lavish wedding can interfere with other goals like home ownership and having children. And then there's divorce is common. Now, this is why people don't get married, right? Divorce is common, and then marriage also enforces gender norms. And then the positives are protection of sexual rights, and then formal commitment and familial connection is another positive. Any of those stick out to you, Joel?
I mean, I think the first one is probably like of marriage, right? The idea of like the cost of a wedding and all of the production there, if you want to call it that, may be a bit of a deterrent why people put off getting married, and as a result end up in common law. Of those who start out common law actually end up married, and so that's a piece of the data that's not quite there. But what stood out to me is that like you don't have to have the lavish wedding. You can go get married with the justice of peace and just take care of business, right? And so I think I would speculate, while I believe this is a huge factor, I also think it's the cultural norm of we have to get married in a more formal sense, and it's sort of frowned upon to do it informally, or I should say, to just do the legal proceeding side of it and sort of not worry about the celebration that is very expensive. I think that many people probably end up in common law unintentionally, and so this is where let's say the government's unintended consequence was that they made divorce more difficult, technically, and maybe divorce is not the right word, while they were trying, like, the intention of common law was to protect let's say the spouse who, whether they wanted to get married or was supporting the other in this arrangement, but didn't have any recourse to in the same regards as a divorce. Based on the cost, though, arguably, if this is a relatively small wealth, a lot of it's going to be eaten up by the lawyer fees. So you've the unintended consequence potentially is that it's more difficult and more costly, while the intended consequence of why was common law created.
Yeah.
I think from the Christian perspective, the idea of a formal commitment that goes along with sex and raising children is something that is more easily avoided in our culture with the common law scenario being created. But that's a bit of a hypothesis as opposed to a proclamation.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think the idea of the protection of sexual rights. So, for example, if you're not married, or I'll put it the other way: when you're married, your spouse owns you. So, so your wife, for me. So, for example, Tyra owns me. She owns me sexually, and then I own Tyra sexually, right? So I can't step out of my marriage and I can't step outside of my marriage. Versus if there isn't any formal agreement, yeah, like you made an informal vow in front of nobody, um, right? Then right, the person technically they don't own you. A boyfriend and a girlfriend, in every sense of the term, you guys are just friends, and so for you to step out, yes, it's not. I mean, it's not good integrity, but it doesn't hold the same weight as opposed to you've made a vow before God in a covenant where you've basically given up your rights to another person. And so with that said, if you are just boyfriend and girlfriend, you're just friends. Versus if you're married, you've become family, whether that's a name change or even just the change of allegiance. As the scripture says, when God was laying the institution of marriage, and he says in Genesis, I think it's Genesis 2, and he says, for this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. And that idea of leaving and cleaving is a change of allegiance, where your allegiance as a wife and a husband is no longer to your family, but when the husband and wife come together, you're now family. Versus if you're not married, then you guys are just friends. Hence the term girlfriend, boyfriend.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And it's I think it's your point about informal commitment, right? And you're not really making a commitment toward before anybody. And so I think it's an interesting question that or something that I'd be curious on the data potentially, and maybe hard to figure out. But that would be, what's the level of common law spouses that there's unfaithfulness in the relationship, as opposed to the exact same percentage. But I think your point about an informal commitment, and then what are the consequences of that with regards to the relationship, is an interesting question that this data is pointing me towards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now let's move on and look at the next topic. So Canada has the highest share of common law couples among G7 countries, owing mainly to the popularity of this union in Quebec. So the key question is this: why the increase in common law in Quebec?
Mm-hmm. And my first take is, just as I thought, I was trying to think through it. Like, I know culturally there's a, some differences. Like, and I know this is totally unrelated, but with respect to the church, a lot of French curse words are actually like cursing aspects of the church. Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar. The essentially tabernacle, which is reference to tabernacle, is a huge,
Mm-hmm.
or I shouldn't say huge, a common curse word. And so I just wonder if the history of marriage and the church is a part of it. That would sort of be my initial speculation. What has your research shown, Darnell, as to the nature and why this is so common in Quebec?
Yeah. So there was an old article about, I think from, let me see, there was an old article, I think, from about 4 years ago, and they addressed this question. And so there was this woman, Helen Bellew, a professor at Institut National, excuse my French, Recherche Scientifique in Montreal. I think research is actually research, but I don't know how to pronounce it in French. That's what happens when you skip grade 9 French, guys. To go play
You mean
dominoes.
when you got out of grade 9 French?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So Helen Bellew, in 2015, she did a survey of thousands of couples across Quebec to determine why they might prefer common law relationships. And she said this. Well, these were her findings. So there was misinformation about the rights they have within common law unions. And the reasons why Quebecers choose not to get married, she explained. So when they say that they don't want to get married, often they believe it's the same thing to be married or to be in, which isn't correct, said Bellew. She says that the Quebec government sometimes gives the impression through social policies and tax income law that your legal rights are the same if you're in common law relationship, creating confusion. People think that somehow with common law unions, there's a lesser attachment, but I don't think that's the case. The next point she makes is culturally in Quebec, common law unions are socially accepted, and many don't even know if a couple is married or not. Women often don't change their names when they get married, and even the language they use word to their partner in a way that means that they are living in a common law union, even if they are married. And then the last point she makes is they reject the traditional vision of gender relations, prefer common law in Quebec.
Interesting. Just for the listener, in the StatsCan link, there's an infographic number 5. They can see the percentage or proportion of couples that are living common law by province. So I'll say that the majority of provinces are between, so the Canada-wide is 23%. Most provinces are 16. Ontario, for example, is 16. 17, 18, 19, 20, 23 is sort of the most common provinces. The ones that there's 4 that are sort of above that threshold. Quebec's 43, Yukon is 33, Northwest Territories is 36, and then none of it is 52%. So none of it being the only one with the majority of couples being common law. So I just thought you could check out that graphic if you're more interested. But for those that are listening only, we focused in on Quebec, partially because the percentage of people as well, and the lack of remoteness to the province made it stand out. And so really Quebec's average would be driving up, or Quebec's percentage would be driving up the average for Canada more so than the other 3 that are high.
Okay, and for those people who are from the U.S. listening and they're wondering, okay, well, what's up with Quebec? Well, Quebec has had a history of trying to be try to separate from the rest of the nation, and they kind of have their own way of going about things, where they are socially conservative. Is that fair to say, Joel? More than we are over here. What do you think? What's unique about Quebec?
Quebec, they are primarily French, and they're very socialist. So their socialism in Canada, they're leading the pack. Let's put it that way. And I say that based on. So for our American listeners, we have this thing called transfer payments between provinces, and Quebec is always the one getting the most amount of money from all the other provinces. And so that's where that would be the basis for my claim that they're the most socialist, because they have the most government spending in disproportion to the revenue they bring in, i.e., the rest of Canada
Yeah.
subsidizing their government spending.
Right. And then I would say that they're conservative in the sense that they're not as socially progressive as the rest of Canada. Right. Hence why they have those religious bills and so forth. I can't remember what bill it was. I think it was Bill C-21. I can't remember. C-21.
Yeah, I think it was Bill
21.
No, there's the C is for the federal ones. I think it's just Bill 21 because it's the
Bill
provincial
21.
one. But
okay, yeah, okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Okay, cool.
They have a peculiarity to their nature, so I'm sure maybe one of our listeners knows a little bit more. Maybe if a listener's got a 2 cents onto why Quebec has so much common law, feel free to hit us up, sixcentsreport@gmail.com and all our socials. Let us know.
Yeah. Now, the next point is gender diversity. So they just recently started tracking these numbers. So gender diversity status of couples is captured for the first time. So about 1 in every 250 couples includes at least one transgender or non-binary person. So, Joel, and in the tracking of non-binary, transgender, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I jumped into at the very bottom. There's a table that shows some. It was table 3, gender diversity status of spouse or partner of transgender person and couple in Canada. I mean, because I'm more numbers oriented, I sort of, was drawn to this piece. It just speaking to the percentage of, so it's like transgender men, and then it does the same thing for women. So I'll just mention it, but it's like transgender men and couples, and then it's like with cisgender man, cisgender woman, transgender woman, non-binary person, and both for transgender men and transgender women being in a cisgender couple, or sorry, their other person in the couple being cisgendered, is the most common. Not to say that necessarily stood out to me, but I just found, this data just most intriguing to me, just to see, let's say, the diversity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's good. For me, when I was looking at some of the stats, I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, okay, well, these numbers here, it kind of reveals like, oh, it's taken into account where we are as a country and where the country is growing, how it's growing, and where it's going, right? So to me, I think it's helpful to track these stats. I think there was a couple stats that jumped out at me that kind of made me go, So in 2021, of the 8.6 million couples in Canada, 32,000 binary person. Now I don't have my calculator in front of me. Maybe Joel, you can punch that number in and find out what the percentage of 32,205% of the population of 8.6 million is.
It's a rounding error to 0.
All right.
It's basically infinitesimally small as a percentage.
Okay, hold on to that point. All right. So then, so together, same gender, transgender, or non-binary couples represented 1.5% of all couples in the country. Hold on to that one. Most same same gender couples with children are composed of 2 women. And then same gender, transgender, or non-binary couples are more prevalent in Canada's largest urban centers, particularly their downtowns. All right, Joel. Yeah. So what do you think of all that?
So I did the math. It's basically like 0.4%.
Okay.
2,000
And
8 points.
yeah. So that's what do you take away from that, man?
That 0.4% are sorry, what was the 32,000 number of?
That 32,000 is so in 2021, of the 8.6 million couples in Canada, 32,205 included at least one transgender or non-binary person.
So, at essentially 0.4% of the population, that would be sort of that would be in line with my expectations, in the sense of like how off, how, as a percentage of the total population, what percentage of people would qualify into that category. I would have speculated under 1% would have been my uneducated guess. So to say essentially 0.4% of couples have a person in that category, yeah, that would be in line with, I think, what's interesting, I would say, is it's in line with my expectation, but it wouldn't be in line with the representation in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As we continue to see, there's a higher and higher percentage, right? It's almost like one couple in every show is having something, that or more than one storyline has something along these lines. And I'm probably including the same sex couples in that statement. But my point is that when we talk about representation in media and in movies, TV, or Hollywood, it's really not about equal representation. And so I don't know, being numbers based, that's where, when I hear 0.4% versus, I would say to you, in media, these things are, or in, the stories, they're represented at 10+%.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's just peculiar from a numerical standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I thought the numbers would have been bigger. Yeah, but the numbers aren't as big as I thought they were going to be. But again, like I said, I think it's important that we're able to track these numbers, because whether you agree with these are real people and they exist. They are some of our friends, of our family members, and so their experiences and their lifestyles have to be accounted for in the stats. And so it's helpful to see where those numbers are, because I like when I'm having conversations and sometimes we're like, okay, well, in our context as Canadians, whenever I throw the stat around where Black people are 3.5% of the population in Canada, people are shocked because they would swear it's more. Well, I'm like, well, of course you'd swear it's more, right? If you live in the GTA, right? If you live in certain pockets of the GTA, you'd swear Black people are 40% of the population, but in totality, it's not. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing with the LGBTQ2S plus community, right? Like you said, you'll turn on TV and you'll see the representation, but it might not reflect in the numbers that we're seeing in the country, which brings up other questions about representation and how that how the proportions of representations are being set up, right? In regards to, okay, well, if there's 3.5% of Black people, but we're seeing them half the time on TV, what's that about? So that's something to think about. But Joel, just
Yes, sir.
what is your 2 cents on this whole thing?
I mean, I'll give a, if anyone looks at I'll have an article from CTV News, which or the the article from StatsCan, if you want to call it an article, right? The headline being Canada leads the G7, right? Which is sort of being, there's sort of two parts to that. One, it's a little bit funny that we're proud of something that again, I just say proud because it's sort of like the way it's presented is sort of like it's a good thing. Why is common law necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, it's neither one of those is really argued, but it's just talking about change. What's interesting to me about that, though, is that when you look at for the audience, look at the list or look at the CTV News. It says leads the G7, but we're in the chart. Right, so there's 3 countries ahead of us which aren't in the G7: Norway, Sweden, and Finland. But I mean, it's like, oh, here's 10 countries. I'm assuming these are the top 10 countries. We're 4th of top 10. Now, maybe I'm wrong that it's not top 10, but that would make this data even more peculiar. The point I'm trying to make is, why not say we're 4th of the top 10? We're 4th in the world. Or 4th in the, of all the countries that collected the data. Why say we're leading of the G7 and then show a graphic where we're 4th? And that's, again, I say that on the Stats Canada website. If you went to infographic, I think it's 3. Yeah, 3. Again, it's listing all 10. It lists 10 countries. I believe it's the top 10 again. It's sort of hard to know for sure. Again, it doesn't really say, like the infographic from StatsCan says prevalence of living common law among couples, and has percentages by countries. And so Sweden is 33, Norway's 31, Finland's 28, and we're 23. So what does that mean? Like, does that, again, it sounds like we're proud of this in the data or in the way it's presented, but why? I don't understand. And not to mention, as I said, we're actually 4th in the charts they show. So I don't know. It's just a really weird thing. So other think that some of the stuff that's pointed out here is that common law is very prevalent among young people. And it seems like there is a trend towards living together longer before getting married. That would be my, hypothesis as to why do we see common law growing. And I would speculate, as I said to you, what percentage of these people who live common law, I would think it's a relatively high number, but not. I have a relative who's living common law, and the part of the reason they're living common law is because previous the second time around, let's say. I don't think that their commitment is any different. Is that an aspect of, their history versus the young couple who's never been married living together? How are those things different? And I think those are the questions that this data makes me think about. And, of course, CTV News and StatsCan's not really going to talk about those questions. Their investigative journalistic approach to really dig into these things. Darnell, what about you? What does this data leave you with that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah. Uh, so what I'd like to s- school you guys to is one thing. Just looking at the stats, one thing to think about is look for the statistical bedrock. So a lot of times is like I said prior to the start of the show, I always enjoy getting into stats because it's a survey of the best stats that we have on the country, and so it's always good to find, especially us as Canadians, can find stats that are close to reliable as possible. Now there's no such thing as perfect stats, but this is it gets pretty close. So I always enjoy getting into it, and I consider stats can a bedrock in regards to reliability, or even being able to search out things and ask questions and pull numbers and connect the dots on your own. So yeah, that's important. And then I would piggyback off of what Joel was talking about is why are we so proud? Why are we always trying to push to be number one on the wrong things? And I'll kind of nuance that in the sense that, the tagline was really pushing that common law is what we're about, and that it's better than marriage. But when you look at the fine print and when you look at the numbers, it's not saying that. Well, basically, I'll say it this way: don't believe the hype. Common law is not as common
Read the type.
as marriage in Canada. No, not yet. Not one of those. But common law is not as common as marriage. Is common as marriage. And so the selling point was, okay, well, nobody cares about marriage. Marriage is irrelevant. But according to the stats, um, marriage is is still happening more than common law is. So that judgment, and that's something we could take away from, and feel good about, but also to make sure that we're reading the fine print when tackling this stuff. And then lastly, I think back to episode 107 that Joel and I did, which is called "What's Love Got to Do with It," and that episode really changed my view on romantic relationships. So now I no longer think that relationships are just about romance, but they're actual business transactions, right? So romantic relationships are a division of labor, right? So she brings something to the table that benefits you. You bring something to the table that benefits her. And if you don't like it, you can go find another deal somewhere else, right? So the problem with common law relationships is couples don't think about, or much less read the fine print before they get um, into that relationship, right? And so when you get in, when you don't read the fine print, and then things go south, right? The hardest thing that a person could ever do is maintain a romantic relationship. And all relationships are always tested, and the numbers are pretty high, whether married or not, that relationships do tend to fail. And so you want to make sure that you make a good business decision when you decide to go play Dolly House, as Jamaicans would say. Or right, Dolly House is a playhouse. It's a euphemism. So if you go do that, and both people come in with 50-50, if you separate, it won't be 50-50, right? Because if you come in and you guys purchase assets and you guys grow your equity, right? The equity might not be split 50-50, but you might not leave with it. So it's always good to be wise when getting into these relationships. And I understand, I understand the pull for to be in a common law relationship, right? You want to, you want to be with your boo. It's convenient. You could pay rent. It's easier to pay rent, especially if you live in Canada. It's pretty expensive to do it on your own. So I understand, but you have to be careful of, being forced into a common law relationship, because you, um, you got somebody pregnant, right? Right. And now you're forced and now to this relationship. And Yeah, and now you're doing business on terms that you don't necessarily like, and then that's where it gets messy, right? So I would just encourage the people out there, man. Um, yeah, don't be afraid of marriage. But I would also add to what Joel was saying in regards to young people not being interested. I'll say this: marriage is for Christians and marriage is for unbelievers, right? God instituted marriage for all people because that's what helps to build society. But there's a Christian way to do marriage, and there's an unbeliever way to do marriage. So because unbelievers do unbeliever things, the foundation of their ideas of marriage are trivial and reflects in society, right? But Christians are going to do Christian things and get married. Joel and I have a friend who's recently divorced, right? And he, instead of like being out in the street, trying to be a pretty boy or a prey boy, not a playboy, but a prey boy. That a prey boy is a Christian playboy. If you didn't know.
You mean it's not one who prays?
Yeah. He prays on the gal them. Right?
Yeah, wrong kind of pray for the Christian boy.
Yeah. But he wasn't trying to be a prey boy, right? Really hard to pursue another woman and get married again, to get back in covenant again, to do things the right way. And so I bring that up because a lot of times it would have been easy for him to just say, okay, you know what, let me just shack up with some girl and lay up and live the common law life. But because he loves the Lord and he wants to live in integrity in light of his God and his brothers, right? Where he can come back to me and Joel and the guys and say, hey, look, guys, here's my new wife. And I want you guys to come alongside us and encourage us. So yeah, be encouraged. Marriage is still alive. And common law is just a wave. That's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Well, and bro, you said something about, you didn't exactly say about being a team, but when you were talking earlier about that other episode, it made me think of how often I say to my wife this, stupid punchline, but it's like teamwork makes the dream work, right? Like I make that joke all the time because it is a team, right? Like, and I think the common law scenario is sort of like a soft commitment to marriage being the hard commitment to the team, or the solidified commitment to the team. So yeah, no, I think it's if anything, we're looking at this trend. We didn't mention it in the data, but I think it was somewhere in there. It talks about like a 400% increase in common law, and I don't recall the timeline, but we're, in our opinion, I think we would say we're trending in the wrong direction. And again, they seem to be celebrating something like this, where we would say from a the consequences of this will be felt, and we'll see in 30 years if this trend continues. How does this affect families? How does it affect divorce rates? How does it affect a number of things? You're not going to see the immediate impact, or you're not going to see the impact for a period of time, and maybe going to those countries that are top 4 top 3 above us as a percentage. How long have they been there, and what trends are in those countries would be sort of the next step for someone who's interested in the data and digging further.
Yeah. Let us know what you guys think. Let us know if our pros and cons were off in regards to marriage and common law. Let us know if we changed anybody's mind about marriage or common law. Let us know if you guys have any questions. You know where to contact us. You can contact me, Do Good at Darnell. You can see the little infographic at the bottom there, or the I don't know what we call that, a vector. Well, anyways, it's pretty cool. But yeah, yeah, you can hit me up at Do Good at Darnell, DOGUDDA_Darnell on Twitter and Instagram.
What's Instagram, bro?
Oh, it's the platform you got kicked off of, but I'm still on, so holla at me.
Yeah, TJoelN39 everywhere. Hit me up. 6 Cents Report at gmail.com. 6 Cents Report everywhere. Let us know your 2 cents. And hit us up on Buy Me a Coffee if you want some exclusive access to some content.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?